Hello, I'm Don Brown, London Blue Badge Guide. I do lots of tours of museums, galleries, churches, cabinet war rooms. One of my favourite places is the British Museum, and one of my favourite places within the British Museum is Room 40, which is the medieval gallery. The other day I was talking about the wooden citole, this absolutely fantastic carved early guitar. Tomorrow I'll be talking about the Lewis Chessmen, even earlier, from about 1100. Very early chess sets. Today I want to talk about this magnificent piece of metalwork that you can see in front of you. This is called the Royal Gold Cup. Dates from about 1380, maybe 1390. There's a little bit of dispute about it, but the body of evidence seems to suggest about 1380. Made in France. It's about 23 centimetres high, so that's about 9 inches, about that much, maybe a bit more. Weighs just under 2 kilos, so just over 4 pounds. It's made of gold, and it has got enamelling on it, so absolutely beautiful enamelling. Sets of scenes around it and on the base. It's a lidded cup, so there's another example here just to give you an idea of how the thing works. Because it looks like some sort of ornament at the moment. So that top bit lifts off. You might see around the base there is a row of pearls. There was another row of pearls around the lid of the cup. They've been lost over the centuries. Also at the top you might just see a metal ring. No, let's see if we can see it better there. Right at the very top of it, there's a little metal sort of loop. There would have been a finial on that, which was made up of rubies, sapphires, pearls. That again has been lost over its history. It was stood on a tripod as well, which again we know exists because there is a record of it, but that hasn't come down to us. Its purpose is obscure. It's religious in the sense that around the base there are the representations of the apostles, and around the lid and the actual bowl of the cup is the story of the life of St Agnes, which I'll tell you about in a second. But it seems to have been put together for secular purposes. It wasn't done to go into a chapel, to go into a church. As people have pointed out, it's probably not something that you would use every day. The thing weighs 4 pounds. You can't use it comfortably to drink out of. So perhaps it was designed to be used on the feast day of St Agnes in January. Perhaps it was a piece of travelling metal religious work for the owners to take it and use. The thing is, we just don't know. So it was made by someone called the Duke de Berry, or on behalf of the Duke de Berry, in 1380, probably as a gift for his brother, who was King Charles V of France, whose birthday was the feast day of St Agnes, so sort of fits. Charles died about the time this was made, and it was passed to Charles' son, also called Charles, who was Charles VI of France. If we have a look at some of the designs around it, you can see the stuff on the base at the moment, but let's have a bit of a look at the top. And as I say, this is for scenes from the life of St Agnes, who is a saint from the early 3rd century in Rome. And the story of St Agnes is that she was proposed to by the son of one of the Roman prefects, a young man called Procopius. She turned him down. She said, I am a Christian. I'm married to Christ. So thanks for the offer of the gold and silver, but no thanks. Procopius's father took a bit of an exception to this. Because she was a Christian, he had her tried, and she was sentenced to spend the rest of her life in a brothel, from which she preached. The scene that you can see there at the moment is Agnes on the left, wearing a red dress with a halo around her, and on the ground you can see a sort of blackish, bluish shape. That is a demon who has strangled Agnes's fiance Procopius. So after Agnes had been sent to the brothel, Procopius was murdered, killed by a demon. Agnes very magnanimously brought him back to life, and Procopius's father was very pleased with this, but some of the other Roman hierarchy weren't. And she suffered the misfortune of being condemned as a witch, and condemned to death. And what they tried to do to her, if we can go along to the relevant spot on here, can we see it? I'm being very poor on this, aren't I? Here we go. So she was sentenced to be burnt to death. The flames parted, as they do when you try and burn a saint. So that gentleman in red on the right then stabbed her with a long spear. This was the martyrdom of her. She was buried, and her sister, who, as you all know, was the very famous Saint Emerentiana. I've got it written here. So, yeah, her sister, Saint Emerentiana, you can see there, was praying at the grave of her sister, at her foster sister, and was stoned to death by pagans. And was also made a saint. Shortly after that, the daughter of the Emperor Constantine, who in medieval legend had leprosy, came and lay down on the grave of St Agnes, was cured of her leprosy, went to her father, told her father how wonderful this saint was, and Constantine becomes Christian and establishes a church where the grave of St Agnes was. Constantiana goes off and then becomes St Constance, for those of you who are interested in that. So you've got this wonderful decoration on this absolutely fantastic piece of artwork that is there in the museum. But one of the wonderful things about it, one of the things I like about it so much is not just the fact that it's a beautiful object, and as you walk through the gallery, it catches your eye as you go into the gallery. It's beautifully lit, so it just exudes a sort of golden glow as you go towards it. But it's history. As I say, it was made by the Duke de Berry, given to his brother, passed then to his brother's son, who was Charles VI of France. Around that time you have Agincourt, you have the French being defeated by the English, and this passes to the Duke of Bedford, who was the regent for King Henry VI. By some process, we're not quite sure, it gets itself into the English royal treasury. We know that it belonged to Henry VII, but it's first inventoried, if you excuse the word, in Henry VIII's treasures. And Henry VIII made sure that people knew that he belonged to him. This is a close-up of the sort of neck of the cup. You can see that white and red detail that's been put in. A Tudor rose has been were put onto a ring and inserted into the stem of this cup. Because it was owned by Henry VIII, it obviously passed through Edward, Mary. It was on the inventory again, owned by Elizabeth I. When she dies, it goes into the possession of James I of England, James VI of Scotland. So already we've seen it owned by the French royal family, English royal family, Scottish royal family. James signs a peace deal with the Spanish, and that ring above the Tudor rose is in commemoration of this peace deal, and James gives it to the Spanish ambassador who'd come over to negotiate the deal. That Spanish ambassador then gives it to a convent just outside Burgos in Castile in about 1610, and it stayed there for best part of 300 years. In the 1880s, the nuns of the convent decide they need some money. So they entrust this to a priest who takes it off to Paris, sells it to a Parisian dealer. It's then bought by a Bond Street dealer. It's then bought by the British Museum with funds from the Treasury. So this wonderful life survived when lots of other things didn't. We know Charles V of France, who owned this, owned 25 cups like this of different sizes. This is just a mid-sized one. Most of those were melted down when the royal family needed money. We know this was owned by the English royal family. The fact it was given to Spain by James I meant it survived as well, because most of what James I owned was subsequently melted down by Oliver Cromwell in the Commonwealth. So these little flukes of history that mean that we now, when it reopens, can walk in to the British Museum, go up the staircase, stroll into room 40 and get as close to this, almost as close to this, as James I, Elizabeth I, Charles V of France, all for nothing, all for free. And that's why the British Museum is one of those wonderful places for us all to go and visit. So that's today's. Tomorrow, as I say, we will be talking about the Lewis chessmen. Again, about 10 minutes of that. Go on to my Twitter and tell me what you'd like to hear me talk about next week. 4 choices I put up there. Some more things from the British Museum, Iron Age, Bronze Age, Roman, British stuff. Some things from the Imperial War Museum, which, as obviously a late middle-aged man, I can talk about Spitfires for the rest of the day. Westminster Abbey, or some of the rock and roll scene sites in London. So go on to the Twitter, Don Brown London. Cast your vote. If there is anything else that you'd like me to talk about within reason, just put that in the comments down there. Thanks very much for joining. I shall attempt to save this and put it up and cut out all the waffle at the beginning and put this back up onto the IGTV later on and onto YouTube. So thank you all. Possibly see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.